Now we're good on YouTube. Okay, great. So thanks everybody for coming today. So it's always an honor to step in for Tom and teach. So today we're going to do Bible study. We're going to run through some stuff we're going to spend a little time in Exodus, a little time in Numbers, a little time in Joshua. So yeah, I'm having one of these weeks where like I just felt like I was having one of these weeks where when I looked at the conflict, the trials, the strife, and then you come to today on Sunday and you're trying to, I think for a lot of us, we're trying to kind of leave it at the door, and then we come into Sunday and we're trying to bury all the things that we had throughout the week, and we're finding some sense of peace today. And when I look back at the week and I thought to myself, well, man, there was a lot that didn't go right. And one of the things that gave me the least amount of peace waking up yesterday was that I had hoped that the things that went the way they did throughout my week and in my life, I wonder who saw them. And there was a part of me it's almost like I'm a little naive to say, man, the people that are watching me most closely are going to see a side to me that I don't want them to see. And I know this too, that throughout the week, the thing that gives, I don't know about you guys, but when I come into a Sunday and I just want to be refreshed and replenished, the relationships that matter the most to me in my life when they don't go the way that they should go, those are the things that give me the most trouble on when I come into today and I want to leave it at the door. Almost feels like I should be sitting there and somebody else should be here. You get this sense of disqualification to say that, man, if somebody that I dealt with throughout the week is watching this, hopefully what they'll see is they'll see some humility, some grace. What they're not going to see is perfection. And so that leads me kind of into what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at two men in particular. We're going to look at Moses and we're going to look at Joshua. In general, the world that we're living in right now, I was led to this portion of Scripture and to these two men in particular because I'm watching my own life and who I'm leading and who I'm modeling my life after. And then I'm looking at what's going on in society and in the world today. If you haven't noticed, there is a lot going on in our world right now. And I'm looking at younger people that are so lost. They're loved, they're known, but they're lost. We need those people to become leaders in our community and for the church to build God's kingdom. In order to do that, we need to intentionally lead them. Moses was an intentional leader. He wasn't perfect. Joshua was his aide. Joshua studied him very closely. And so today we're going to talk about what it looks like, how we're going to connect this into today's world, and what it looks like to leave your legacy to somebody that's watching you. So today I want to try to identify who's the Moses in your life? Who are you modeling your life after? Who are you going to be a pattern of? And now that you're that Moses, who are the Joshuas in your life? See, because when it comes down to it, you and I are a chain of God's ongoing work in the world as kingdom builders. And you and I are modeling our lives after others, and others are modeling their lives after us. And so there's a couple questions that I want you to sort of think about as we go through this. Question one is, how important is God to those you want to be like? How important is God to those you want to be like? And question two is, do those who are watching you see God reflected in every area of your life? I use the word reflection carefully because it's not perfection. Those that are watching me in my life, and oddly, when I look at my kids, my oldest son in particular, I think of my son. I know my daughter, I don't know It's weird. As a man, you think of your son, even though you're trying to model for your daughter as well. But I connect more with my oldest son right now the most. He's becoming a man. And hopefully, he sees a reflection, because he certainly won't see perfection. So what did Joshua see in Moses that made him a model to follow? And like I said, it certainly wasn't perfection. So let's take a quick look at Moses' resume. Moses, of course, led the people. He got the assignment from God to lead the people out of Egypt. And he struggled with a lot of stuff. We could touch on a little bit of that. And then he brings them all the way to the finish line. But he's not going to cross over into the promised land. He's going to hand that torch off to Joshua. Throughout the course of Moses' leadership, Joshua was watching him very close. So if you do take a look at Moses' resume, kind of like his CV, where he sort of little bullet points, dots in his life that we all get to observe. God comes to Moses in Exodus chapter 3 at the burning bush. And God says, I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt, and I have heard them crying because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. God's coming to Moses with such compassion and honesty and mercy. Moses would want to just grab onto this and run with it. And then God says to Moses, tell them I am sent you. So again, you would think that Moses would want to grab this, run with it. It's given a specific instruction. But of course, Moses' question to God's command was, what if they don't believe me? To which God gives Moses, you could see this also in Exodus, he gives him 3 signs to show the people so that the people will believe him. And of course, Moses responds by saying in Exodus 4, I've never been eloquent. I am slow to speech and tongue. Then Moses goes on to say, this is in Exodus 4:13, he says, pardon your servant, Lord, please send someone else. Joshua is the aide to Moses. And so far, if I'm Joshua and I'm studying this guy, so far I've seen not perfection. So far I've seen doubt. I've seen fear. I've seen essentially Moses disqualifying himself with almost basic refusal. I think so far in my life, people that are watching me the closest have seen this lack of perfection in some of my doubts, some of my fears, some of the things that I just haven't done very well. But hopefully they see a side to me like Joshua sees a side to Moses coming up. Also, I noticed this throughout Moses' life, you see a guy who just can't stay out of trouble. When he thinks he's doing something to help, trouble sort of follows him. And so how does he deal with all of that? I like it. And therefore, I see Moses throughout his life, he was at his finest and he was at his worst when responding to the conflict around him. He was at his finest and he was at his worst. When I see him rescue this Hebrew slave, and while he's doing that, he kills the Egyptian. And then, right after that, he goes to referee a fight between 2 relatives, to which one relative, 2 Israelites, to which one would say, you're going to kill us just like you killed the Egyptian? Moses was at his finest and he was at his worst. But over the years, what I noticed, and this is what gives me some hope in what I've seen in Moses, over the years, something amazing happened to Moses' character. He didn't stop reacting, and he shouldn't have, but rather he learned to respond correctly. Joshua got to witness all this. Again, got to remember, Joshua is watching a man that he's going to become similar to him in how he leads. What was he able to observe and reflect upon as he takes the things from Moses and leads his people on his own journey for an assignment that God has given him. I mean, it was challenging enough for Moses to lead 2 million people in the desert day in and day out. And much of the time, Moses goes through this relationship where he's dealing with him and God, God and the people, and then him versus the people. Like, for instance, it seems to me like Moses, for a lot of the time, it's almost like he was like this buffer between God and the people. Moses had to respond to God's anger at the people and the stubbornness of their hard hearts, their stiff-necked people. And then he had to respond to the people's bickering and complaining. Moses, why did you bring us out here? There wasn't enough food, or you could have let us die. We were fine in Egypt. We had food. We had water. Even though the people were slaves, they were comfortable there. Moses brings them out. He has to listen to all this bickering and fighting. Not to mention that he had to respond to the people's unjust attacks on his own character. And so Moses' leadership, it involved reaction. And Moses wasn't reacting, not perfectly, but Moses was reacting consistently with obeying the will of God. So real quick, we're going to go to Numbers chapter 27, verses 12 to 16. And I want you to see how Moses responds to the consequence of not entering the promised land. Moses, as we just discussed, Moses went through a lot. Moses was trying to ask God for his patience and his mercy for the people, listening to them fighting and bickering, listening to them, the people attacking him and his own character. So Moses gets the people all the way to the finish line, and now Moses is not allowed to enter. He's disqualified from his lack of obedience to God. But he did his job and he brings them there. And now he's got to hand the torch off to Joshua and train somebody else. It's almost like, you handed the ball off to the same running back from the 1 yard line all the way to the other 1 yard line. And then you're going to bring in some other guy to hand the ball off and he's going to score the touchdown. Like, what? Where's the glory in that? So how does Moses respond to the consequence of not entering the promised land? Moses could have been so resentful and angry towards Joshua. He did. He got the people all the way to the finish line, wasn't allowed to cross it. One of the things I think Joshua learned from Moses, or at least I did, was this. Moses was a great man and he did a lot of good things. And there's people in my life and there's people in your life that are watching you do some really good things. Moses' personal greatness did not make him immune to error or the consequences of those errors. To me, that's very important to understand. So overall, in Moses, we see a man that was shaped by God. God didn't give Moses any new abilities or strengths. Instead, God molded what Moses already had to be used for his purpose. So, who are the Moseses in your life? Who are you looking to for the shape of your spiritual journey, for accountability, to challenge you to grow, for how you live your life in your marriage, how you raise your kids or manage your finances? So here's the point. The Moseses that you're modeling your life after is the Moses you'll become to the Joshuas that are watching you. I'm very careful with who I spend time with and who I'm going to model my life after. I test them and I check them. Because question one, if you remember, was how much is the people that I'm modeling my life after, how much are they like God? No, they're not perfect, but do I see that reflection of God in them and the consistency of obeying God's will in their life? Am I seeing that in them? So I need to know. I need to know because the Moses that I'm modeling my life after is the Moses that I'm going to become, not completely. Of course, I'm going to take some things from that person. I'm going to leave some behind, but I'm still going to soak in some of that stuff so that I'm going to become a Moses to the Joshuas that are watching me. What are they going to see in me? So the next point is this. Know your Joshuas. Know the people that are obvious to you in your life. My kids are obvious to me. Also, when I go out into the world, look around for Joshuas that may not have a Moses. That a little bit goes back to what we're seeing in our society today. Look at some of these kids and what they're doing. They're completely lost. If they had somebody who poured into them to let them know that they're known by God, their identity is in God, they're loved. Instead of the lies that they've gotten in their broken homes, what would love say about them? Not the lies that they've been told. And then also be aware of Joshuas that are watching you when you don't know it. There's people in your life that are going to come to either know God or maybe not know him based on what they see in you, and you don't even know they're watching. I went through a time in the last year and a half where I got an advice from somebody who happened to be how do I say this without disclosing? So he happened to be an attorney, and he said to me, when you go throughout your life, live it as if the jury is watching you. Don't say or do or react or live your life in a way that you have to be two different people. Be consistent. I went through this with my son the other day. We were at a baseball game, and there was nobody at the Tiger game. It was a day game, and my son and I are sitting in a row, and then there's that row that separates so you can walk around Comerica Park, and there's two gentlemen sitting behind us. And every other word was those words, F and S and MF and everything else. And my 15-year-old was sitting next to me, and I said to him, Jacob, let's pause and listen to this conversation. So we did. And I said, do you think those men talk like that at work or in front of their mom? Or, in other words, are they being the same person here as they would be in front of other people? And he said, no, I don't think so. And I said, what does what they're saying, how is that a model for somebody else in life? What are those words doing for the conversation? Are they adding color? Does it mean they're more tough? Are they more serious? What is it doing for the conversation? And my son said, well, it's really doing nothing. I said, if you ever decide to use those words, let me know, because if there's something I'm missing in order for me to use those words and model to you, maybe they're useful. No, Dad, I don't think they're useful. It's real life application in telling me that if I'm going to model my life do I say a word like that every now and then? Regretfully, yes. Not perfection. Is there a reflection? Excuse my language, I should have said that to you. Earlier in the game, there's a lady sitting behind us, and the Twins hit a home run, and she said, S. She looked at my son. She was this older lady, and she apologized 6 times. I'm so sorry, young man. I'm so sorry, young man. I don't know. So God molded Moses. He used his strength. He didn't create a new Moses. He used Moses' strengths that he already had. And so, okay, let's move on to, we're gonna look at the handoff. Here's the connection between God and Moses, or between Moses and Joshua that God's using. And this, I think, is the cool thing. God used evidence for Joshua. God used things that Joshua can see and hear. He used the evidence of his faithfulness to Moses to encourage Moses to prepare Joshua. So God didn't allow Joshua to just be handed a booklet and said, hey, once upon a time, there was a guy named Moses. This is what was written about him. Be encouraged and be on your way. Here's your assignment. God allowed Joshua to see things in Moses' life, clear evidence. And so if you go to Exodus 17 really quick, I want to show you this. And I'll just read this to you real quick. I have no idea how long this takes. So I'm kind of, all right. We'll just read this really quick in Exodus 17. So Joshua fought the Amalekites as Moses had ordered. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the hill. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning. But whenever he would lower his hands, the Amalekites were winning. When Moses' hands were tired, they took a stone and put it under him and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side, one on the other, so that his hands remained steady until sunset, so Joshua could overcome the Amalekite army with his sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, here's evidence. Write this on a scroll as something to be remembered, and make sure Joshua hears it. Make sure Joshua hears it. Write this on a scroll. This study is going to come with 2 homework assignments. It's a study. It's class. 2 assignments. If you feel motivated at all, my advice is do the assignment sometime today between now and Tuesday. If you wait till Thursday or Friday, and you're like me, it's over. So here's homework assignment number 1. Mark your memories. In other words, get a journal. There are some very sensitive things written in this journal of mine. And one day, when my kids read it, they will not see perfect. But hopefully, they're going to get a miniature playbook of what, I can't even hold it. It's like emotional. They're going to get a miniature playbook of what Dad did, what he didn't do. They're going to learn things about me. They're going to say, oh my gosh, I never realized that. This is how he handled his trials. This is how he handled relationships with our mom. These are the people, these were the Moseses to his life that he reflected on. I wasn't, you know what? I got to read this. So I was debating. As I went through homework assignment number 1, and I thought, even if this week you just go get a pad of paper, write it down, because somebody's going to get value from that. I was reading back in 2017. I was writing about God's will, and some of the providential. When you look at God's will, His personal will, His moral will, His providential will, and I was writing about the different wills. This is a journey. This is an entry that I wrote on November of 2017, and I. This is how many years ago now? But in the personal relationships, and we talk a lot about Tom. Tom's hopefully enjoying himself in Florida. But under providential relationships, I wrote Tom Donnelly. This is 6 years ago now. The way in which God has used this man in my life is so crucial that I must consider where to even begin. There are so many ways and so many things that God has done through him for me: counseling, teaching, challenging, compassion, caring, endurance, praying with my wife. Got to stop there. But you can see that I recognize one of the many in my life years ago. And what that person did was, if I was going to live my life and follow God through hard times, God was gonna put somebody in my life as a Joshua that I can take and grab onto that, so that when I went to lead my own family and my community where God put me, I had something to go on. And Joshua had something to go on. He had a lot to go on. Because after Exodus 17, if you go to Joshua chapter 1, God would say to Joshua in verse 1, After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, somebody who spent a lot of time with him. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan into the land I'm about to give to them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses, the guy you've been watching all these years. Remember him? As I promised him, I'm going to give you. I've given you evidence, Joshua. In verse 5, as I was with Moses, so I'll be with you. I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Joshua was entering into an assignment that was pretty scary. And God's reminding him, you saw how I was with Moses with your own eyes. I've given you the evidence. Now you have the courage to take on the assignment I'm giving you. I've given you this person in your life. Do you remember? He wrote it down. Moses must have done a pretty good job. If you go to Joshua 1, if you stay there, and you go to verse 16, then they answered Joshua. The people, the community, they saw what was going on here between these two guys. Then they answered Joshua, whatever you have commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we'll go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. The community knew what was going on between these two men, and the community knew that they needed to encourage Joshua. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. So remember, we're all a part of a chain. We're all connected to build a kingdom for God. I think, though, we need to face this reality. The reality of one of the greatest challenges of the kingdom of this world. We talk a lot here about the kingdom of this world. And that challenge is replacing God's kingdom leaders to become leaders themselves. They're not going to see it through perfect people. Are we giving them enough? Do they see enough reflection? And so here's the point. The fulfillment of God's kingdom on earth will become the responsibility of our successors. And as we all know, as we're leading, let's face it, death is the deadline for leadership. And we don't know how short that is or how long that is. It doesn't mean, and we're going to talk about this at the very end, it doesn't mean that the seeds we plant that are germinating beneath the surface aren't going to bear fruit. I'm not saying that, but there's a value of when we're here on this earth, the leadership that we live. It's the leadership that we live. The deadline for that is death. And so the greatest and best test of our leadership is our willingness and ability to train others for our position. I think the greatest thing as I was studying this, one of the greatest things is I thought, what about the oldest in the room? And what about the youngest in the room? And I'm seeing an application for us all. It doesn't matter how old you think you are, or how much time you think you don't have. Write some of this stuff down. Write down the 5 most important things in your life and let it rest. Give it to somebody who you think is watching you or you know is watching you. I've identified some of the Moseses in my life throughout my journal. I had people in my life that I wanted to be my Moses. Growing up, there were people that I identified, and they didn't quite live up to that. And this is, I just want to touch on this really quick. And here is a lie that the enemy will use to try to disqualify you from becoming the Moses to your Joshua. We were just talking earlier before we started here. And the enemy, the enemy will try to use dysfunction in your life to tell you that the person in your life that should have been your Moses, the person you watched, and the person you hoped for, let you down in so many ways. And so you get this, the enemy's going to try to trap you and have you fall into this sort of lie and say, well, the person that was supposed to be there in my life left me. The person that was supposed to be there in my life walked out on me. And so therefore I'm broken and I can't become the Moses to the Joshuas in my life. I can't do it. That's a lie. That's a lie. And now the person that should have been your Moses, eventually, if the enemy wins or creeps in, becomes your Pharaoh. And so you spent part of your life as a slave to that hurt and to those lies. That person in my life should have been my Moses. They weren't. And now I'm a slave to Pharaoh. That person became my Pharaoh. And instead of looking for that encouragement and breaking that chain and trying to become and create a new legacy for yourself and for the people around you, you spent way too much of your life looking at the Pharaoh in your life that kept you enslaved to the lies. I met with a friend last week, and he told me that he spent years of his life unprogramming himself from the hurt of a Pharaoh that he longed to be as Moses. But he realized that through the grace of God, that in spite of the pain, God had a plan to break that cycle of dysfunction. And I as I spoke with this person, I was so proud of him. It turns out through the mentors in his life, he had a coach that taught him about accountability and family, what it was really like to be loved and to belong. He was molded by mentors and a professor, taught him so much. He used God's grace through counseling to break that cycle of dysfunction because he realized the importance of the legacy that he was about to leave and the people that were watching him. It was so powerful for him. So that leads me to the second homework assignment. This week, you're going to write 2 letters. Please do this. About twice a year, I try to write the Joshuas in my life a letter. So my kids, each one of them, even my youngest David, who can't read and can't talk yet, he gets a letter from me. And I'm even going to tell you what the letter should say, in case you're like, oh no, homework. Tell somebody in your life that they have what it takes. They're loved. They're good enough. You're proud of them. One of the things I like to mention in my letter to my kids is that, look, I'm not perfect, but you and I are going to walk each other home. I'm grooming you to be young people that live a life for God. Hopefully, as they get older, they'll keep these and they'll be reminded of their true identity in God, the real Father that they have. And let me just say this, one more thing about Joshua. When you think about your earthly fathers, some of us had great relationships with them, and some of us didn't. But notice in the Bible, it says, Joshua, the son of Nun, wasn't even his own dad. God put Moses in his life, not his father, which some of us have great relationships with our dads, and that's great. But just in case you don't, God's going to put somebody else in your life. And it doesn't mean in the Moses that you are, that you need to identify just your kids. We're all part of a chain in growing this kingdom. So last thing we're going to talk about really quick is the power of a seed. And I just need my phone right there. Power of a seed. My wife and I, well, she's been reading it more than me. She reads it to me. And this is the second time through this book that we're reading. And it's called The Circle Maker. Actually, it's called Draw a Circle. And it's, The Circle Maker is about this man. His name's Honey. And what he did in his life is he would go through the difficulties and the things that he wanted to circle in his life. He would actually circle the things in his life in prayer. Earlier last year, I was in a building with people that I was trying to get through this thing that I was going through. And my wife knew it was a difficult challenge for me. Her and her girlfriend took it upon themselves while I was inside to circle the building, walk around it. There was incredible peace that I had that day, and something that I never dreamed that I would go through, but it made a difference. And so, as we become leaders, we build leaders. So don't underestimate the power of the seed that you're planting. So now I've shifted into this. The deadline of leadership is death. However, you're going to plant seeds in your life. And while you think that they're meaningless, almost like a seed, you plant it and it disappears. But it's not dead. They seem like they're dead, but they're not. They're just germinating beneath the surface. The things that you're circling in prayer, the people that you pray for, and the people that you're mentoring, you might become discouraged in leading them and saying they're not changing. This isn't changing. They're not becoming better. Their hearts are staying hard. How am I going to get through to this kid? Hanging out with the wrong people, doing the wrong things, planting that seed. Honey, the circle maker, said this about the speed of a seed. And this goes along the line of, I'm too old to be that Moses. I might as well just live out the rest of my years, or I'm sick and I can't do this anymore. But Honey said this. Toward the end of his life, Honey the circle maker was walking down a dirt road when he saw a man planting a carob tree. Honey questioned him, "How long will it take this tree to bear fruit?" The man replied, 70 years. Honey said, "Are you quite sure you will live another 70 years to eat its fruit?" And the man replied, "Perhaps not. However, when I was born into the world, I found many carob trees planted by my father and my grandfather. Just as they planted trees for me, I'm planting trees for my children and my grandchildren so that they will be able to eat the fruit of these trees." You're not wasting your time. In fact, he says, this incident led to an insight that changed the way Honey prayed. And in our case, changed the way we lead. In a moment of reflection, the circle maker realized that his praying and our leading is planting. Each act of leadership is like a seed that gets planted in the ground. It disappears for a season, but eventually bears fruit that blesses future generations. In fact, our leadership, our physical leadership will go away, but the act of who we lead for will live forever. God blesses prayers that have been prayed a long, long time ago. They don't die. Hopefully, somebody will read this journal and say, man, he's been gone a long time, but the experience are going to stand the test of time. It's going to help somebody. This isn't a happy Facebook post in here. This is real life stuff. We cannot, again, we were talking earlier before this, I was talking to somebody that we cannot make people become leaders. We can't make these seeds grow. All we can do is plant and water. But if we plant, God promises to give the increase. And just so remember this about your leadership. If you sow kindness, you're going to reap kindness. If you sow generosity, you'll reap generosity. If you sow love, you'll reap love through the people that are watching you. 2 assignments. Mark your memories, write 2 letters. Identify a Moses in your life. Write him or her a letter. Don't email them, don't text them. write on paper, put a stamp on it, put it in the mailbox, or deliver it to them. Identify one Joshua. Write them a letter. I'll tell you this one quick story really quick, and then we'll get going. As some of you know, my son Jacob was born at 26 weeks. He was in the ICU 74 days. This is in 2007. Didn't really know God all that well yet. But as I looked at my son laying in a hospital bed, I said to myself, why God? Wasn't mature enough at that time to ask, what could you possibly be teaching me through this? I said, why? Why the patent ductus? Why the infection on the foot? Why the high CO2? Why the ventilator? Why? Why the inconsistency of care? We're all a part of a chain in God's kingdom. 15 years later, God doesn't owe me the answer to why, but every now and then, there's that grace, that reveal that God gives to all of us. And in this case, 15 years later, a man would come to me and say, Michael, you're out of excuses. You need to get up on that stage and preach. On December 19th, 2021, I did that. I walked off the stage, and my 15-year-old said, Dad, that was pretty good. I think I could probably do better someday. Go right ahead, son. A couple months later, my son would volunteer as a freshman to give a message at his chapel in front of high school. This young 15-year-old kid would volunteer, not a class credit, and he wanted to give his testimony of what? God's grace, mercy, faithfulness of when he was a preemie. 15 years earlier, I got the answer to one of my questions, why God? Do you see the chain? Somebody saw something in me and wouldn't quit on me so that I would stand up to give a message. Why would God put me in that position? So that a 15-year-old preemie would see his dad walk off the stage and say, now I'm going to do that? And if you don't think that's enough to be a part of a chain, my son, as hard as he is on himself, which if you read what people said about me when I was 18, I was hard on myself. He has that. Somebody heard him, a staff member from his school, heard him being hard on himself and said that message was for no one. This man walked off the stage, somebody who worked at Oakland Christian said to my son, that was great. I don't know if you know this, Jacob, but that message was for me. My wife is in the hospital about to give birth to a 26-weeker, and I'm scared to death. Planting seeds in the chain of connection throughout all of this? It's not there? Come on. The power of my son to give a testimony on a question that I asked why about 15 years earlier, and I'm getting answers now. I thought that seed was dead, buried beneath the surface. Just another trial with no purpose. And now I'm an imperfect Moses, just trying to give an experience to a Joshua that will become men and women of God. So, okay, I guess I'll close in prayer, and then we'll move on to Tim's message and service. Father God, I thank you so much for this time together with these people. Hopefully, Father, the words of the Holy Spirit through me will motivate them to realize that there's truth in their journey as a leader to people that are watching them. Father, don't let anybody in this room feel disqualified with lies that say they're not good enough to lead, or with the lies that Satan would the enemy would try to steal from them, and the lies that he would try to implant in them to see that no one's watching me. Don't allow that to happen. Father, send us out today to be leaders in the community for those that are lost. Help us to have the confidence through you to become great leaders in this community. Bless this Sunday and help us to walk with you in truth and in love. In your name we pray. Amen.